Hi, everyone. This website is to serve as a instructional resource for you when it comes to designing your online course, specifically as it comes to assessment strategies. Now, we're going to talk about formative and summative strategies and kind of put them in context for you and how you can use them. But we're also going to briefly touch on course evaluation, as those two things are very closely correlated with each other. So to begin this conversation, I'd really like to discuss the difference between assessment and evaluation. This difference is very well illustrated by this quote here that says, assessment can be part of an evaluation, but assessment and evaluation aren't synonymous. So assessment is a measure of student learning. Did students learn what we asked them to learn? Evaluation, however, is when you're going to look at a course program. In this case, it's going to be maybe your entire online course or a module or an assessment that you're using, and deciding if it does what it's designed to do. So evaluation has a subcomponent that might include assessment, but those two terms are not going to be used synonymously with each other. So we're going to focus mostly on formative and summative assessments, but keep in mind that it can always tie back to your evaluation. To discuss the difference between formative and summative assessments, that's kind of well illustrated by this diagram here. You can see these rungs of each ladder is represented by a formative assessment. So these formative assessments are checkpoints conducted throughout a unit or throughout a course that is used to provide feedback to students and inform your instruction. At the end of a unit or a culminating project, for example, would be your summative assessment. So this is going to be more grade-oriented compared to feedback-oriented, where students really get to demonstrate whether they've made sufficient improvements in each of these formative assessments and whether they've learned the material in your course. So let's discuss a few various assessment techniques that you can incorporate into your online classroom. The first is this concept of an exemplary assessments, and these were very uniquely defined by Hubba and Fried in 2000. And they provided a list of these 8 characteristics of exemplary assessments. The first is that they need to be valid. They need to provide very useful information that guides students' learning. Second, they should be coherent. So they need to be structured in such a way that students can meet the desired learning outcomes that you've set forward for them. They need to be authentic, meaning that they should be framed with an ill-defined problem or a discrepant event or some real-world connection. They should be rigorous, engaging, challenging. They should allow students to contribute their individuality to assessment, so they need to be respectful. And then, very importantly, assessments should be responsive. So they should provide feedback to student learning so that they can make appropriate improvements in working towards maybe a summative assessment. But these assessments should also be responsive in that they provide feedback to the instructor. So the instructor should take the data from these exemplary and formative assessments and evaluate the effectiveness of their course. Is your course doing what it should be doing? And these formative and exemplary assessments, if designed appropriately, can really inform that evaluation. So moving on from these exemplary assessments, another assessment technique is just formative assessments. So this is when we sample student learning. This is meant to guide the learner. So teacher feedback is going to be valued more than grades. And then again, it should inform instruction for both students and teachers. What should students be doing differently? What should teachers be changing and adapting to meet their students' needs? With formative assessments, usually your assessments and objectives are going to be very tightly correlated, which leads to a discussion of backward design. So Wiggins and McTighe here described backward design and suggested that it occurs in 3 steps. The first is identify your desired results. So what should students be able to do at the end of a unit or at the end of your course? Second is decide how will you know that they have achieved those desired results. So what is your acceptable evidence? And then the third is plan your instruction and your learning experiences for your students from those desired outcomes and acceptable evidence. Traditional face-to-face classrooms or traditional ways of thinking about assessments might go from designing these learning activities and then deciding what outcomes their students should have gotten from those learning activities after. Assessment should not be an afterthought. It should be a forethought, especially when you're teaching an online class. Some various examples of formative assessments are going to be CATs. These are going to be classroom assessment techniques that you use, classroom polls, self-reflection surveys, case studies, emails. Maybe it's a reflection discussion. You can have students working individually or as groups. You can have students completing self-tests where they're provided immediate feedback on, self-paced multiple choice tests, for example, which follows a very behaviorist approach to learning. And then score models can also serve as a formative assessment. And score models, for those of you who aren't unfamiliar with it, these are going to be a collection of specifications that are very user-friendly and easily navigated that can be imported into most LMS learning management systems. And these are interactive web-based learning activities that can be imported in. Finally, we have these summative assessments. So these are those formal assessments that are completed at the end of a unit. It might be something like a term paper, a quiz, a test. Maybe it's a reflective synthesis project. This is where you evaluate your learning achievement. So did students make the necessary improvements through each of those formative assessments? And then this is where this concept of grading rubrics is pretty important. Grading rubrics allow for students to understand what an acceptable level of work is. It gives them a task to work towards. And it's also a way to make sure that students are engaged, or students can represent the knowledge you feel is important for your course. And there will be some resources for you to design rubrics as well, as that's tied hand in hand with assessments. And then finally, I really want to tie this discussion back into evaluations, which I felt was really important. Again, assessments can be a component of evaluations, but they're not synonymous. So evaluations can be formative or summative, and there will be some resources on the web page that allow you to conduct a formative or summative evaluation of your course. And there are essentially 7 steps when you're evaluating your course. Decide what should be evaluated in your course. Decide on your evaluation type and method. Develop a timeline. Conduct your evaluation. Synthesize all that information, reflect on it, and then finally, you're going to implement your change. So this ties into this quote here by Ducharme, Hansen, and Dupin Bryant that says, evaluation does not end when data is collected. Instead, the process incorporates the data. And in this regard, this leads me to a community question I'd like to pose to everyone and hopefully can get some community feedback. Do you agree or disagree that assessment is continuous? We've been talking a lot about how assessment should inform your instruction and should inform student learning as well. So is assessment continuous? There is a link on this webpage for community members to post documents or resources or pose questions that they would like answered by other experts or other people with various experiences. And so I will post a sample response to this question, or my response to this question, and then I would love for other people to contribute some resources based on your experience and your expertise. Hopefully this website is very helpful for you and can provide you a lot of information related to assessments in the online environment.